Hi, everyone. Welcome to Africa in SA. This is the podcast, which is basically the voice of African people living in South Africa. This is a platform for each and every African to basically share their perspective, their opinions, and their stories about living in South Africa. And today we've got a friend of mine, Fusumzi Janki, who has been my friend for just about 15 years. And he is a teacher. And yeah, today we have him, and I would like to ask him a couple of questions in terms of the African diaspora living in South Africa. So I'm basically looking for his opinion in terms of, the whole xenophobia, chidima, whatever is going on in South Africa that basically implicates African foreign nationals. So, Vusumsi Janti, welcome to the show African SA. Just a brief introduction to our Africans.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vasumzi Kyanji, and I'm a friend of Ananda for the past 15 years. We obviously grew up together, and we share things together, and we are actually quite close. So he's very mindful of what's happening around Africa and South Africa, and also he's been living in South Africa for the past 15, 20 years, as we
More than that.
more than that. So yeah, so this is where we are, and he's about to ask me a few questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, welcome to the podcast African SA. I've been basically looking to interview a local guy, someone who is actually South African, just to basically give us their 2 cents in terms of, the whole controversy that's basically taking place in South Africa. So, for Sumzi, so like I said, this is a podcast where African people share their stories, their successes, their failures, how they came to South Africa, etc. So it's actually a pleasure to have you as a South African guy to basically share your perspective, but also your understanding in terms of, the stories that are actually going on in South Africa. The first question that I have for you is, what do you think about foreign nationals, particularly African foreigners living in South Africa?
Foreign nationals are basically more than welcome because we don't have any borders. So it should be an interconnected state
Mhm.
where people can move around, where I should have the ability to go to Nigeria, I should have the ability to go to Kenya, I should have the ability to go to Namibia without being harassed or scrutinized because we are living in the same continent. We are just a part of a continent which is in the southern hemisphere where it is South Africa. So South Africans have this entitlement that South Africa only belongs to South Africans, and basically Africa belongs to everyone else.
Mm.
Um, Knowing you, you are someone that is particularly goal driven, someone who's ambitious, someone who is mainly focused and who wants to do something better for themselves and their family. So if you are exposed to resources to a place where it's basically much more developed because we are considered as a third world country.
Mm.
So then why not have the ability to go and grow and improve your circumstance
Mhm.
somewhere else? So foreign nationals in South Africa, they are good, they are bad,
Mm.
but as long as I've known you, you are someone that has been good. So therefore, I cannot paint everybody with the same brush and
Mm.
say all foreign nationals are
Mm.
bad people.
Mm. Mm. Interesting. That's actually an interesting perspective. In your opinion, who do you think is actually the enablers of so-called immigrants or illegal foreigners to actually come to South Africa? What do you think in your perspective? Who do you think is actually enabling this whole thing to happen?
I think it's just a lack of education,
Hmm.
where people are unaware of what foreign nationals are and what they intend to come and do in a different state,
Hmm.
and what is their reasons that they come to basically explore a different state or a different continent or a different country. So I think it just boils down to a lack of education. And the enablers for foreign nationals to come from one country to another is the fact that some other countries are not developed
Hmm.
as well developed as any other country.
But then, in terms of the South African borders, specifically, who do you think allow or actually allowing people to come into the country without proper documentation? Because I mean, on a daily basis, we have Zimbabweans, we have Mozambicans, Congolese, etc., who are actually coming into South Africa without any proper documentation. Who do you think is actually the cause of that?
That's the government.
Okay, because I mean, most local South Africans or South African people would actually say, nah, these foreigners must go, they come illegal in South Africa. Because my idea is that somewhere, somehow, there's someone at the border who allows this to happen, who's
Exactly.
actually making money out of this whole
Mm.
situation.
Mm.
You understand? So I think you've actually clarified that because I mean it is basically the government, it is the police, it is
Mm.
the black people who are actually at the border. Because I mean, in my case, for example, when I traveled to Angola recently, which was last year,
Mm.
I obviously traveled via a road, used the bus, and when I actually exited the border of South Africa, it was actually black South African people, not even whites or coloreds. The majority was actually black South African police who were there,
Mm.
who basically, sort of check your passport, etc., and everything. So I mean, I agree with you. Those are the very same people who allow, all these things to happen, basically. So
So
next, I just wanted to find it from you. Like, are we taking your jobs? Are we taking your women? What do you think about that? Because I mean, most locals would actually agree that we are taking their jobs and women.
for me, there is no jobs to begin with,
Hmm.
and the jobs that you are based because to be honest with you, there's no policy, there's no um, plan to curb unemployment. Um, yes, our current president might have this fantastic idea that he's going to have an investment
Hmm.
platform where people from overseas will come and invest in our country, but
Hmm.
that's not enough. You know what I mean? So we are sitting at a current 37% unemployment rate,
Hmm.
and within a country with 50 million to 60 million people living in South Africa, that is actually quite a large number
Hmm.
of people unemployed. So currently, there is no jobs. Um, People that who are taking the jobs are predominantly private sector,
Hmm.
and private sector also needs to be monitored by government because they are exploiting our African people to cheap labor,
Yeah.
of which I feel most South Africans and most youth feel that they are basically overqualified for these jobs and therefore they will not stick to the jobs.
Hmm.
I think with us as South Africans, we know our worth, we know our value, we know our potential, we know. I mean, we have a great South African education system on a higher institutional level,
Hmm.
especially colleges, varsities, TVET colleges.
Hmm.
So we are exposed to a lot of opportunities, and therefore, if I'm a qualified teacher, for an example, if I'm a qualified plumber, I will not settle for a restaurant job because that's where I feel like it's not my scope of practice because
Hmm.
that's how we've
But
been brought
then
up.
but then what if you're unemployed and looking for a job? Wouldn't you consider doing something that's not within the scope of your qualification in order to feed your family?
That's the
because
sun.
because I mean, for example, with most African foreigners, they actually come to some. These are actually
Mm,
qualified people. Some people are doctors, etc.,
mm,
qualified in their own respective countries. So they come to South Africa,
mm,
and obviously, there's no way they're going to work as a doctor or a teacher, etc., when they're in South Africa because they don't have proper documentation to begin with. So most of these people basically settle for lower jobs, like for
mm,
example, driving a scooter or being a car guard, for example, looking after
mm.
cars, etc. That's basically what they do in order to survive. Why is it that South African locals do not basically, sort of, venture into these areas as well? Why is that so? Because at the moment, let's say foreigners basically take over a certain industry that South Africans didn't want to tap into, it becomes a problem at a later stage. For
Mm,
example, Uber drivers right now. A lot of South Africans are complaining that, hey,
mm,
Uber drivers is mainly foreigners and whatnot. a Checkers 360, it's usually foreign drivers. They're complaining. But these are jobs, because most of these foreigners are doing jobs that South Africans don't want to do.
Mm.
That's the reality. Look at Spaza shops, for
Mm.
example. Somalians are doing it. They've
Yeah.
taken over the market. The government wants to ensure that the local people basically play a huge role in terms of the Spaza shops.
Mm.
So I don't know, man. Maybe give us more information in terms of that. What's your thoughts?
It's the system of apartheid of how we've been limited as South Africans that we need a piece of paper for us to excel, and therefore education is the foundation to combat poverty. But even the jobs within itself the lowest jobs that we are exposed to within itself, it is not it is not beneficial for an educated South Africans, because we want to have the land, we want to have the minerals, we want to be owners of production. We just do not want to participate in a system that is only for consuming purposes. You work yourself from paycheck to paycheck. So we as South Africans, we value our worth, and for us to earn a minimum wage at a level of our education, there's just that massive gap where we are not going to stoop low. We are not going to take a scooter job. Like I said, we want to be owners of, we want to be part of mass production. We want to own shops. We want to own franchises. We want to work and give back to our community, and not only the community, but to our families. We want the best value
But then,
for our families.
but then I don't see that happening. Because I mean, like for example, we have the ANC who is actually in power. I don't see that happening. Maybe perhaps under the EFF leadership or the MK leadership, that could possibly play out. But currently now, what's the solution for the local South Africans who are not educated, who are fighting with foreign nationals over, the jobs that I've mentioned, driving the scooter, etc. Like I said, these are the jobs that foreign nationals are actually taking, for them in order for them to actually feed their families, as opposed to the South Africans who do not want to do these jobs, although they're not qualified. Like, what do you say about unqualified South Africans?
We haven't nationalized. We haven't. We predominantly look at privatization. So that is a massive limit. Had we have nationalized certain industries where underqualified South Africans, or having the low skilled or middle class, mid to mid income jobs would have been more available, then by all means we could have curbed this massive unemployment rate. But because we have privatized, and if you look at the current South African statistics, still 90% of privatized and land still belongs to white owners. So therefore, and if you are privatized, you have the say as to what happens within your own company. Okay. You have the say of what happens within your own industry. Okay. So a lot of things are red taped in the privatized industry, because no South African is going to want to be driving a scooter for 20 years, for 30 years. Yeah. No South African is going to want to allow that to happen. So therefore, a lot of privatized industries also look at red tape in terms of where they can cut costs. So therefore, take the foreign nationals. Yeah. Because it's cheap labor. It is overtime that is quite cheap. It is more mass production for them. They work for peanuts. The workers work for peanuts, and the owners end up being richer and richer, and the poor becomes more poorer. Right. So therefore, there's a massive influx of foreign nationals diving into the more privatized.
So there's a market for them.
There's basically a market for them. So it's a massive problem that we have.
All right, cool.
Because they know they cannot register unions. Yeah. They cannot get pension fund. They cannot get sometimes they don't have any benefits. Yeah. Medical aid to be taxed, none. So therefore, just give the person what he works for and what he's worth. So no South African is going to allow that. So you cannot go back home to Zimbabwe, or you can go back to Angola, you can go back to Congo to say, this is my pension fund. I've been working for X number of years in this country. For this company, this is my pension fund, and therefore this money that I have can help and sustain my family because
Yeah.
none of that has been taxed.
Okay.
So that's a massive target
All
for them.
right. Cool. Look, man. Look, obviously, I'm from Angola, like any other country in Africa. I'm sure our African guys watching there, they would obviously agree with me that, for example, in Angola, like any other African countries besides South Africa, we do not have social grants for kids, etc. You know, don't you? Do you think? Would you say that social grants basically sort of create a culture of laziness where people are more dependent on the government as opposed to creating a culture where people are actually striving for success and basically fighting their way out in order to achieve certain things without the help of a government. So, for example, when we come to South Africa, we know that there's no government that's there to back us up.
Mm.
We need to basically fend for ourselves. We need to provide. We need to fight. We need to educate ourselves. We don't have NSFAS and etc. That'll back us up and help us in terms of studying in South Africa, or even back home. We don't have social grants. The only grants that I know of in Angola, for example, is the old combatants. Those are the people who are actually getting a social grant, because they actually fought for the country.
Mm.
But in terms of kids, disabled people, or whoever, in general, getting funds from government,
Mm.
we don't have such things. Do you think these things are basically hindering South Africans to actually, sort of, become more independent? Do you
Mm.
do you think they're becoming that it creates a syndrome of dependency? What do you think?
There are pros and cons when it comes to the social grant because social grants are there to help sustain predominantly poorer families.
Yeah.
Like I know there are social grants for education.
Hmm.
There are social grants that like in terms of education where especially when it comes to the youth, because I know the youth want to be very productive. They want to be exposed to higher learning. The youth wants to have a job to basically support and help their families. And therefore, it is a very good thing because, I mean, like you want more for yourself as an individual
Yeah.
and as for your family. So, therefore, you will go through the channels where government helps and supports the
Hmm.
youth in terms of getting them a basis and a foundation in order for them to empower themselves to do much more better than what they are capable of
Hmm.
in order to put food on the table. So I know lots of relatives and family members that have been through an education system where a NSFAS has been provided
Okay.
in order for them to basically achieve or strive to be better than what they are. So that helps enable them to equip themselves with the necessary skills and knowledge to be active participants in the economy of South Africa.
Okay.
So the grant system has its pros and it has its cons. You know, um, that is my opinion. I know there's a lot of people where it also basically highlights that there is money in the system of South Africa, but the thing is, money is not allocated for the right reasons or for the right category in terms of self improvement or self development.
Okay. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. In terms of the spaza shops, so you've seen what's happening right now with the spaza shops, where it is alleged that kids are dying from buying from these Somalian spaza shops. What do you think about that? Do you blame the spaza shop owners? Do you blame the suppliers, or do you blame government?
Government has a massive role to play because sponsor shops is a multi-billion-dollar industry,
Hmm?
and government is not doing surely enough to regulate this industry. They
Okay.
have tried to regulate the taxi industry, however, there is no success in
Yeah.
that because it's the only black-owned business
Hmm.
that it is more kind of nationalized, but it's got subcategories and sub bodies that run that system. But
Mhm.
that's why we have small business enterprises, SMEs,
Mhm.
where government should equip people and fund people to basically help them start their own
Businesses.
spaza shops, their own businesses.
Mm.
But therefore, government, like I say, is also part to blame because
Mhm.
they're not doing what they are supposed to be doing in terms of empowering Abantu to
Mhm.
start their own businesses. So therefore, that's why we have lots of, you know, shortcuts where people are blaming or getting, the suppliers when suppliers get expired foods and sell it down to tuck shop owners, and therefore the tuck shop owners sell it to the consumer. So therefore, it's
So,
not regulated enough.
so basically, you blame the government.
The government.
Okay, cool. All right. I don't think you've answered me enough when I asked you, are we taking your women? I think I've asked you that, right? Are we taking your women? Are we taking your jobs? But I want you to emphasize on
When it
on the
comes
women.
to the woman's story, you won't see a South African going out with a Zimbabwean.
Why is it so?
Eh,
Let's demystify that
I don't
particularly
think
before we move on to the South African issue. Why do South African men not date Zimbabwean men?
Zimbabwean women.
Yeah, sorry, man, Zimbabwean women.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I don't know, my guy. I don't
But
know.
what do you think? What's your opinion?
I simply feel like we are not exposed to how
Mm-hmm.
how other African women
Mm-hmm.
conduct themselves.
Okay.
We are not exposed to their culture
Okay.
in terms of their upbringing, in terms of education, in terms of the culture that they've been brought up with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what we've been lately exposed to is that how other African men strive, how other African men are doing so well that they flaunt a lot of money to attract South African women. So yeah,
Maybe you
man,
can spell it out. Which nationality is that?
Nigerians.
Exactly. So if you're from Nigeria,